Welcome back, everyone. We took a week off, but this is the David Land podcast. I think we have a few things to talk about. So things are a little bit different this week. Kyle was unable to make this week's podcast, and I don't blame him. I wasn't able to make last week's podcast. But I had an opportunity to bring someone in to kind of call me on my BS and discuss a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about throughout the day. And now it's a name that you're probably not familiar with, but I'm hoping that towards the end of this hour, you will be, because Don Rohr, you are, I would say, the best way I would describe you is you're someone in racing who pretty much knows and talks to everyone. Now, are you friends with everyone? Probably not, but you're friends with most people. And I'd say that that is something that is unique and interesting in racing. Give me about a 30-second elevator speech of just exactly who you are for my viewers, so that you can establish a little bit of who you are and what you do in racing. Because, again, you're a guy who, to me, is one of the top people when we're bench racing, I guess I could say.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for the uptick in the ego there a little bit. But no, I've been in motorsports for about six. This is my 16th year. Prior to that, was working in the music industry, whether it was touring, talent scouting. Worked for a couple major labels in Manhattan, and then gosh, 2008, I got my chance to go move to North Carolina and work for Brian Vickers with Red Bull, and his personal program in Thomasville, and Spire brought us in about 2012, 2013 to be kind of part of their conglomerate of motorsports properties, giving it drivers, tracks, teams, sponsors, all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, Brian had his setback with blood clots, which was tough. But at Spire, it led me the opportunity to work with James Hinchcliffe, who, I mean, he's a big brother, little brother, depending on the conversation, and when he puts me in my place or me put him in his place, and have had great success with him. He's obviously a wonderful, marketer, property spokesperson, driver, friend, all of that kind of stuff. And then that kind of parlayed into my current role, where I'm kind of doing all the commercial and business and partnership stuff with Fast Motorsports in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Series. But you know, to your point, I've made it a point throughout my career to be friends with everybody, to lend an ear, lend a hand, whether it's you need advice or you need banners help put up somewhere at a racetrack. I'm not afraid to do it. Somebody said to me at St. Pete, you don't walk with Don Rohr. You take two steps, you stop, you talk to somebody. You take two more steps, you stop, talk to somebody else. So, motorsports and what we do in general is all about relationships. And certainly you and I, over the last couple of years since you've come on the scene here, with a different dynamic in the way that you view media and present your topics and your strong opinions on some topics, and that, it's just the way of the world. So excited to be here, talk to you guys for a little bit. I got to go to bed soon because I got to leave at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to the airport to fly to Sebring tomorrow. So
Same,
stoked for that.
same. That's well, that's a good thing for our discussion today, because we will be talking about the 12 hours of Sebring as well as the World Endurance Championship at Sebring. I will be covering both races, and of course, as you know, as you just heard, Don is involved with one of the principal teams and one of the most popular teams, certainly one of the most well merchandised teams in the sports car scene. Don, you once said to me, which I wasn't sure whether to take as a compliment or not at the time. I think it's a compliment, but I think it's interesting, and hopefully will be a bit of a teaser for our discussion today. You said a discussion with me is like an 18-page contract or something to that effect. Could you explain that for the viewers?
I just went over a 36-page one today,
Oh
so
my
this is
God.
easy. No, in every contract there's the preface to it, and there's the opening paragraphs, and then you start to get into the nature of the relationship, and then you start to get into the branding and the deliverables, and then you get really into the legalese, nitty gritty of insurance and liabilities and all of that kind of stuff. David, you are a liability, so
Oh my God.
let's
Oh,
just let's
oh.
just, let's just put that up. But for every one, there's a two. For every three, there's a four. For every A, there's a B. For every B, there's a little one, little too, and it just kind of keeps going and going and going, and it's this crazy org chart of what turns out to be an executed driver contract, partnership contract, relationship, whatever. And it's there's intricacies to all of them. None of them are the same. Everything's done different. Some people want a really short one, and some people want a really long one. It just depends on who you're dealing with. So I think some of our conversations are really short and sweet, and I put you in your place, or they're really long and convoluted, and we have a great discussion topic. But no, that's kind of what I meant by that. And then I think it's one of those things too, where you go, and I don't think most people know this, you go well beyond the surface and well beyond, big one, big two, to go all the way down to little I, triple I, all the way down, to kind of dig through your thoughts and your opinions and all of that. So that's kind of where I was going to get parlay the business side a little bit into the media side of this world and how you operate.
I've been called a lot of things in my life, Don. Trust me, you've probably heard some of them. But liability, that's the first time. So that's very interesting. I'll add that to the list. Let's actually get into some of the discussion today, because we've got a bit of a catch up here, which is we got to talk about St. Pete. I was impressed with St. Petersburg. And I guess we'll start, since you kind of brought up the business side, and we'll talk about kind of bigger picture. While I don't think that the seating capacity of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway attended the St. Petersburg weekend, like was claimed in some places, I do think it was a fantastic weekend for the sport. I mean, you want to talk about the eye test, and St. Pete, for me, passed the eye test. It was difficult to walk around. Maybe we should call it the walking test, because that was definitely a capacity crowd as far as I'm concerned at St. Petersburg. Great weekend, really entertaining race. Firestone re-upped with the city for 5 more years. It's you've been in this sport a lot longer than I have been, Don. Is there a better place to start an IndyCar season than St. Petersburg?
I can't think of much better place to start any racing season than St. Pete. I wish they could do like 3 weekends of different series throughout, and kind of do some super ticket package. They've got the capacity on the other side for bigger paddocks if they need to do that over by the airport. But to your point, big crowds. I sat in the grandstands for a bit on Sunday. Neck is still red from that. Almost every seat full. Anytime you went down to Vendor Row to either get something to eat or something to drink, long lines, which good and bad, whatever. There was always people coming in the gate. I mean, there was a day I left the track at 5:00 and there were still people coming in. There might've been like one more SRO race or a Road to Indy program or something like that, but they were still coming in. And the best part about that event, and you could say the same thing for Long Beach, is it's a community event, right? The people in the city, they don't leave, they come in, right? I think that's where you get a lot of the walk-up traffic. The 5K on Thursday, which I struggled mightily through, was very well attended. It was good to have that back. The party in the park that IndyCar put together was great. Big attendance there. Great driver participation, team participation with the cars and displays. All the suites were full. I think they had to build extra ones from what I understand this year. And it was good on Green Safari. They made an investment this year. I don't know if you noticed, but the grandstands and the suites were all purchased. Those were new. Fence lines were full. Paddock area was jammed. I mean, it was a really, really, really great way to kick it off. The weather was fantastic. The floating barge out back was always packed, and you could get yourself an adult beverage and sit down and watch it on the TV for a little bit. So, kudos to Green Sav and IndyCar for pulling together another great opening weekend.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that barge was outside of the media center, and I have to say we were tempted a little bit every time we kind of looked out into the bay over there and said, man, that pontoon boat sure does look fun. But the big thing for me, of course, you're the business side of it. I'm the racing competition side, and I thought the product that IndyCar put together, this is going to go without saying because it's been the marketing line for years and years. But I mean, it was the truth this weekend, is that the racing product that IndyCar put on the track. I mean, you really couldn't probably get a more entertaining race start to finish. I mean, flag to flag than that one. It was 100 laps of pure chaos. And, outside of, I'd say Delara probably finished second. The real winner was, I think, Vice, who got a hell of an opening episode for their 100 days of Indy. The only thing I would say is, and I think I have a suspicion, I don't know for sure why he did it, but the only thing I wish hadn't happened, I wish Scott wouldn't have publicly gone to Romain Grosjean. Do it in private, but leave us, from a drama standpoint, make us think you hate each other. Even if you don't, make us think you hate each other, because that clash for the lead. I know I jumped out of my, I wasn't sitting in the seat. I was down on the fence line in turn one. But when I saw that happen, I was like, I jumped up and down. I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. I can't believe that happened. And I hope the TV, I know it didn't necessarily translate into numbers on TV, but hopefully it will give some momentum going forward with as exciting of a race as we saw at St. Pete. Don, what were some of your highlights from that race? What kind of stood out to you?
I mean, it had something for everyone. It had, great pure racing strategy, all that kind of stuff. You had some carnage, which, good, bad, or indifferent, people tune in to see it, right? It's part of the package. You had a pass with a handful of laps to go where, created an exciting finish. To your point, going to the trailer at the end of the race, I mean, that's typical in any motorsports, kerfuffle, whether it's on pit lane or, post race, guy walks up to the trailer. How many times have we seen that in NASCAR where somebody comes up? So, I mean, good on them. To your point, hopefully Vice got some good content out of it. But yeah, I mean, I think overall very entertaining. To the incident between those two going for the lead, it was funny. With about 30 laps prior to that, I was sitting with some friends of mine, and they were, those guys were chasing each other down, whatever. And I said, Scott Dixon, I think he was running third at the time. I was like, he's in the catbird seat. And they're like, why? Because they were kind of new race fans. And I said, those two are going to get into each other for the lead, and Scott Dixon's going to drive right through it, Days of Thunder style, and take home the trophy. But yeah, entertaining race, start to finish. Again, drama for everybody. Whether you're a purist and like the racing, whether you like to see the carnage, whether you like to see the drama, and anytime you get a late lead change, it's great for the sport. So kudos to everybody on track as well.
To your point about the late race pass, I mean, I think we were, and to your point about Scott Dixon as well, I think we were a plenum explosion away from having another leader running into leader. Because I think Ericsson was catching a Ward, and I think his pace. I mean, we saw the minute he got around Pato, he pulled a gap. I think he was catching him. That was kind of the sense we got when we were watching it. And to your point as well, we kind of were sitting there going, wait a second, it's Dixon. It's like, of course it's Dixon. He's always seems to be third. One of the interesting things about Dixon is that usually he doesn't have a good St. Pete. More often than not, he gets off to a bad start, and then he just kind of comes in strong at the end when we're talking about championship. It's probably a bad sign for the field that Dixon got off to as quick of a start, or as at least as good of a points start as he did in St. Pete. One of the big talking points, though, and I think a lot of it, unfortunately, is media generated. I know I see a few fans talk about it, but like this idea that Marcus Ericsson is still like underrated or something. I mean, I get it. I overlooked him at the Indy 500 a couple of times last year. I stopped doing that after the Indy 500. That proved to me everything I needed to know about Marcus Ericsson. I picked him for the championship this year. Don, again, you're a longtime observer of auto racing. You've seen it from the inside. Am I wrong? Is Marcus Ericsson the real deal?
Absolutely. And I think Marcus Ericsson has a lot of Scott Dixon in him. Like, they call Scott the Iceman. And you look at Marcus, he looks like Val Kilmer, Iceman in Top Gun. If you go back a few decades.
Yeah. Oh my God. I didn't even think about that.
But he's as calm and cool of a collective of a guy that you'll ever sit there and talk to, right? And always welcoming, always willing to sit and talk. But you put the helmet on the guy, and to what you were saying about him catching Pato. I mean, that's the whole adage of here, kitty kitty. Like they when you can see the leader in the mirror, there's a a half a tenth that comes in that right foot. And Marcus is the real deal. When he was in F1, whatever, good, bad, or indifferent about the team that he drove for. He ran fairly well at Aero McLaren when he was there. Had some good luck, had some bad luck. Winning the Indianapolis 500, you just don't do that, right? That's not just something you show up and do. And when he came off pit lane and had those fresh tires, I was sitting in penthouse E, I believe, and you just watched him chase and chase and chase and finally got him and was just long gone. So yeah, Marcus is a real deal. I love him as a person. I think he's a great brand ambassador for the sport too. I think what you've seen him do, whether it was last year after the 500, and then some of the media stuff they've had him do early on in the season has been great for the eyeballs of IndyCar, not only from a North American perspective, but globally as well. So I think Marcus is here to stay for a while. I would not be surprised if he goes out there and wins 3 more this year. Yeah. I think he'll be competitive at the Speedway because, a guy like that, once you taste it once, you want it again and again and again. Helio's the prime example of still trying to go out there and go get another one, right? So yep. He wants rings on all his fingers. So, yeah, Marcus is a real deal. Can't say enough good things about him on and off the track.
And once you figure out how to win the Indianapolis 500, unless you're Scott Dixon or Mario Andretti for some reason, it always seems like, you figure out how to do it again. I mean, I think Takuma Sato is the greatest example of that. Who would have ever, especially when he came into the sport, but even prior to, his F1 experience, no one would have ever thought that guy would last over 500 miles, not much less be the first guy across the line twice in a 500-mile race at Indianapolis. You made the point too, and I think it's something that's often overlooked. And it kind of goes back to, what I do believe was at one point a time where a lot of people overlooked Marcus Ericsson. He was in prime position to be a driver at Aero McLaren SP. And they decided to not go forward with him when McLaren came in as a full partner with that team. I think that's probably, while he hasn't really said it all that much, I suspect that's been a chip on his shoulder to a certain extent. And I think one of the most interesting things, especially going into the Indianapolis 500 this year, is going to be that battle between Aero McLaren and Chip Ganassi. Obviously, we know the court battle and all the extracurricular stuff that happened last year. But if you look at those two teams, they pretty much make up the entire top 10 of the Indianapolis 500 last year. And there's been so much changeover and turnover between those two teams, driver, personnel, sponsor-wise. And we know there's some bad blood between the team owners. I think this has, again, you want to talk about TV show? Hello, Vice. This is what you do. This is what you talk about in your Indy 500 preview video is those two teams. Focus on them entirely because they're going to be the two quickest teams. They're the top Honda and top Chevrolet team right now in the sport. I mean, everything right there is coming together at the biggest race. And I think it's going to be, that to me is going to be an interesting, fascinating storyline going into the month of May for sure.
Would love to see Scott Dixon win it though.
Real interesting.
If he's chasing down another title, if he's performed this well at St. Pete, to your point, he double points. Or I'm sorry, that's a thing in the past. Sorry.
Not double points anymore. Nothing's double points anymore.
Brain fart on that one. I think for a guy, if you're looking at those two teams, how do you pair up the young guys versus the veterans, right? Too, and you've got the Polo on one side and the Award on the other side. You've got Dixon on one side, you've got Kanaan on the other side, and you've got Rossi and you've got Marcus. Like I think that's going to be a really good head-to-head show between both those entities. So remains to be seen. They hit the track end of April for the open test. We'll see who's dragging sand and who's flat out. But I think that's a really, really great storyline and something that I didn't think about going into that.
That's why I'm the media guy.
Does Andretti sneak in there somehow, right? And Kyle Kirkwood showed a lot of great speed in St. Petersburg. He's a very, very promising, young, quick, very talented race car driver, whether it's in an IndyCar or sports car. Like this is somebody like Kyle Kirkwood, the wild card to win the Indy 500. Wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't put it past him.
I
So,
think that's one of the big stories out of St. Pete is the fact that Andretti Autosport had the pace, but essentially completely imploded. Now, was it completely their fault? No. In a lot of ways, you look at Colton and Grosjean, they both got taken out. But, when you have an opportunity like that and have essentially, well, you crashed all four of your cars and only one of them actually made it across the line and finished the race. And it was the one, ironically, well, one of the two that flew through the air. Two of the four Andretti cars went flying.
How great would it have been if Kirkwood jumped that car just like Marcus did at Nashville, puts a new nose on it, and just sails away. But yeah, tough outing for those guys. Obviously, a lot of wrong place, wrong time, and I think that's one thing that, just to kind of back up a little bit on St. Pete, was everybody was giving that race a little bit of a bad rap for the opening lap incident. But like, if you walk that racetrack, if something goes wrong there, it goes wrong in a hurry. And it is really, really narrow because it's that, left, right into the straightaway there. And if somebody's turned sideways and the track is blocked, you're done, right? Like, except for Connor Daly, who just, again, kind of dazed the thunder between the wall and somebody who was spinning this way and kept on digging. But, that's one of those finer points about the street racing too that I don't think a lot of people understand. Is you look at it on TV and they've got these cameras that are up on these towers and they look down and you're seeing this huge peripheral, version of the racetrack. But when you're sitting there, or when you're going on that track, or I was running it at a really, really slow pace on the 5K, but like, it narrows up big time. So, for as much as people were like, oh, crappy driving or whatever, like, that was all circumstantial. Once one of those track corners is blocked, like, you're just along for the ride.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that was how I felt about it. And I was disappointed. There was a bit of a narrative forming early on in the week that was like, oh, do we have too many cars? And I'm like, my God, we just got 27 full-time cars. We're already talking about that there's two. Like, can we at least agree, as a collective sport on one thing, that the car count being high is a good thing? And can we just, and I'm saying this, the eternal pessimist, the 27 cars, probably, do we know if Ed's doing Texas? I don't remember, but it could be 28 at Texas. So, 27 to 28 cars for the full season, that's good. And no one did have anything to do with that crash. That's my feeling.
Great problem to have. Let them figure out how to accommodate more cars. Right. I mean, I think any series would love to have that problem. But yeah, 27 full.
Not F1.
Yeah, they've got their guillotine. They've got their wall that they've set up, and that is a whole other conversation and political, banter for another day. That would take a clear liquid mixed with something to have a real conversation about that.
Oh, geez. Well, let's move on to this week. Let's actually talk about something that's happening this week. Super Sebring. Now, this was an interesting stat I pulled up. I guess this is take 3, right? On doing World Endurance and IMSA on the same weekend at Sebring. Obviously, we've only had actually 2 races. We did have cars on crates in 2020, but the race got canceled. And that was kind of an interesting thought process and a stat I'll kind of bring up in today's, or not today's, but this week's videos, especially when talking about the World Endurance Championship. It's called the 1,000 Miles of Sebring, but in 3 tries, it has not gone the distance yet. Thunderstorms have interrupted the 2 races they actually tried to complete. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. One of the big picture things going into this weekend, and we've heard about it, talked about it, I have even a couple of times, is the idea right now of sports car convergence. That's kind of been the big thing. Not only is this the first time in a lot of ways that we are going to see a lot of equipment that is going to be racing and competing at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the world premiere of cars like the Ferrari, the Van Wall, U.S. premieres for cars like the Peugeot. But this is the first time we're going to be seeing, and the only time this year, that all of the prototype machinery eligible for the Le Mans, whether it's entered there or not, will actually be in attendance. Every single different car will be on the track at the same time. So it's going to be a great learning experience for both series going forward. But I think the other thing that I'm curious and interested to see going forward is, will this be the last time we see a double header with IMSA and World Endurance Championship? Because next year, essentially, if it's a legal car in IMSA, it's a legal car in the World Endurance Championship. GTE is going away. GT3 cars will be run in both series. LMP2 obviously already a crossover, and now we supposedly have convergence in the top class, though depending on who you ask, there'd be varying levels of answers there. And we've also heard some things. I know personally, I've heard this, that there's some talk that maybe World Endurance Championship moves their U.S. round to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I know Roger Penske would be pretty keen on that. He's keen on any series running that at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway that he participates in. Currently, I believe WEC would be the only series that he participates in that doesn't race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So we'll see how that goes. Don, what are your thoughts on Super Sebring? I know you've probably been to as many of them as I have. Is it a good thing, bad thing? Is it too much to have WEC and IMSA on the same weekend?
Absolutely not. And I'll tell you that, and I say that because last Friday somebody told me there were over 100 RVs already in line to
Oh
get in
gosh.
on this Wednesday. So if you're a sports car fan in North America, or even globally, like there's probably no competition weekend than going to Sebring, right? I mean, you can
Mhm.
say that from a commercial side, like Le Mans is obviously the holy grail, and I've gone a couple times, and it's just absolutely insane. But the amount of sports car racing that you get to see from global properties at Sebring is fantastic. The amount of access that you get to walk through the World Endurance, Championship paddock and see the setups that they bring in cargo containers is phenomenal. Um, I would have loved to seen more crossover. Obviously, that's really really tough. It'd be tough to run a car all day Friday and then try to enter it Saturday. I mean, there's only one that I would consider an IMSA car going into the WEC race, and that's the Cadillac entry. Is there any? I don't think there's anybody else. Is there?
Is that car even I don't even think that car is crossing over. I'd have to look at the entry list
No, no, no. I'm
again.
saying a car that's already running this. So they ran it at
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah. So the number 2 car, which ran at Daytona as the
Daytona.
zero
Yeah,
two, is now the number
yeah,
2 in World Endurance. Yes. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any. Is there any other prototype car that's probably turned more laps at Sebring in the last couple months than a Cadillac race car?
Well, no,
Uh,
no, no,
yeah,
absolutely not.
right. So, you know, the convergence is great. I think it offers people that want to go race across the pond, schedule and operations and budget permitting is fantastic. You look at the Ben Keatings of the world who probably have more airline miles than the globe combined, going back and forth and running up and down pit lane, jumping in different cars. But I think I wish there was a few more of the WEC cars that would have participated in the Rolex 24, and maybe we see that next year. Maybe once Ferrari shakes down their stuff, and you've got Lambo on its way, and a couple others. Obviously, there's the roadblock where you have to have the production cars come online and sell a certain number of them in North America to be considered for entry for the race. But that's the only downside of where sports cars is at right now. You've got however many OEMs, 18 plus in IMSA. Car counts are great. In the Le Mans, they're having record number of GT cars in that event, to the point where weren't they trying to box out some of the LMP2s or something like that? Wasn't there a discussion of how does
Yeah,
that sit in the overall European Le Mans series, because there's so many prototypes and there's so many GT cars, and where does the LMP2 fit in the whole schematic? So, but kind of just the long-winded answer about Sebring is it's a tremendous race to go to. It's a great atmosphere. It's spring break meets the snake pit meets what meets whatever. there's plenty of great places to watch from. It's a cheap ticket too. I mean, I think to get in for 2 days is like $105 or something like that. Um,
It's a great deal.
yeah, camping's like $100 for an unreserved spot. So, granted, you're in the middle of nowhere. But I do think from an overall sports car landscape, there's probably no better event for the convergence with the potential of, what was it, Bahrain might open their season next year, or there was some. Um, does that set up a super weekend at Indianapolis? Sure, but it needs to be an actual endurance race, right? So it's got to be something for them to cross the pond. So, and then yeah, 1,000 miles last year, man. I remember that thunderstorm because we were collecting water inside of our RV outside turn 16 with it coming in the roof and yeah. So I'm looking forward to it. You know, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I look forward to seeing the World Endurance cars. Seeing how they operate. They bring really some amazing setups. If you walk through the paddock and see what Toyota has, I mean, it looks like an operating room. It is just absolutely incredible. And then the other sight to see, and this is probably more for the gearheads and the competition people, walk by the Michelin tent. It's
Yeah.
absolutely massive. It looks like the place where they hold the combine in Indianapolis, and it's so huge. It's the biggest white party tent thing that you've ever seen, with just, and you can smell the rubber from 100 yards away. So it's yeah, it's a really cool setup. Looking forward to getting down there.
Wow, you covered a lot. There's a lot of things I have to comment on. So I guess we'll start because you mentioned LMP2. Yes, there has been some talk about LMP2, particularly in the World Endurance Championship, going away. That would free up, as you mentioned, some entries at Le Mans, especially next year when we're talking about GT3 cars being eligible for the first time there. Obviously, the hypercars will continue to increase as customer teams actually receive the cars that they have bought. That's been a big problem. In fact, I believe at least one team in the WEC race, I believe it's Joda, is running an LMP2, kind of similar to what we saw with Proton and JDC at the Rolex. They're running an LMP2 as a placeholder until they get delivery of their Porsche. But that's the other thing when we're talking about convergence that I'm curious about, because I've heard conflicting things on, what hypercars would come and which ones wouldn't. As we know, homologation is a big a factor in IMSA. It's not just the production number; it's a big cost to come over here and test
Yeah,
enough
that was
to
yeah, that
meet
was
the
going to be my
requirements.
point. I mean, you gotta, if you're Toyota, you have to fly that car over here. You've got to run it. You got to homologate it. You got to take it to wind shear, and all of the things to meet the specs and have the data set for IMSA to pour over and put that together. So I get why it's a massive undertaking and it's a struggle, and maybe that's why you see a brand like Porsche that's like, okay, well, we're gonna have our two here, we're gonna have our two here, right? With the Penske program and then the customer cars or whatever. Same with Cadillac. So, um, you know, love to see a Ferrari full time in IMSA. I think it'd be
Yeah, you
fantastic.
you and me both. I think I don't think there's a lot of people that wouldn't want to see a Ferrari full time here.
No, it's a beautiful race car. And then you touched on that, the van wall. I don't know who posted the video yesterday, but goddamn, does that thing sound good? Like that is that's a really really good audio clip.
Yeah,
And
it's a real race car, which is kind of neat. I'll say this. That was something I was going to say. I believe it was Graham Goodwin that posted that. At least I'm going to give him credit because I saw at least one video from him of that van wall. And I'll tell you, watching the videos coming out of the prologue, I think this is the most excited I've been to go to a race in a long time. We can, and you and I have had that debate a few times before. Uh, to me, the cars do matter, and when there's something new to see, something new to hear, something new to experience, unexpected. Because that's the other thing you brought up is what's going to be so fascinating about this race in particular is that we're kind of back to the old days, kind of pre-merger, where Sebring in a lot of ways was the true kind of prologue for the 24 hours of Le Mans. What happened at Sebring often mirrored what happened at Le Mans, because a lot of people say 12 hours at Sebring is a lot more difficult on equipment and what have you than 24 hours at Le Mans or Daytona. So with the first real race that we're going to see LMDH and LMH cars go head to head, and like you mentioned, the experience of the American teams, Porsche with the under the guidance of Team Penske, and Cadillac under the guidance of Chip Ganassi Racing, they've logged a lot of miles and won. Chip Ganassi Racing, defending winner of the 12 hours of Sebring. The engine in the Porsche is the same as the last time Penske won with the RS Spider in 2008. So I think this is actually going to be a much more competitive race than we're probably even going to see when they go to France, because quite honestly, I think the ACO is really going to make sure a hypercar wins that race. But I think with the unpredictability of this particular event, with the experience of the American teams, I think prototype in the World Endurance Championship race is going to be extremely fascinating.
No, absolutely. And again, I wouldn't be shocked if Cadillac won that one, right? That again, more miles, more kilometers, whatever you want to say, more time on that track. A lot of data from that one. But I think, to your point about the cars, this is kind of getting on a tangent. The one thing that I don't understand is why sports car racing isn't bigger than it actually is, especially here in North America, because when you drive to the track, you are passing cars that are going to race on the track, with the outside the prototypes. And that's something that everybody can relate to. And who hasn't driven down a windy road and hit an apex, or I'm a race car driver, right? Like there's just something so tangible about sports car racing. It's sexy, it's sleek, like it's I don't know. I've just, and the OEMs put so much into it, and they do a marvelous job. Like at Daytona, there were more OEM displays, I think, than I've seen in a very long time. Whether it's debuting new cars or new technology, or I think Ford had a hydrogen car or something there, or somebody did. But like, there's so much opportunity, and there's so many ways to relate to it. And it's such a family-driven atmosphere, right? Like, I mean, saying maybe Sebring after the race is over, but overall, like I struggle with that. Where yes, NASCAR has always been the behemoth, and IndyCar has always had a great footprint, and F1's growing, yada yada yada. But like, the most relatable form of motorsports is sports car racing, and it's track to road, road to track. So I love seeing what the OEMs do with it, and showcasing new cars and great driver talent. But I just wish more people were exposed to it. I mean, I remember back in the day wearing my Watkins Glen hoodie. They used to run a Grand Am on the short course on Friday night from 6 to 8. It was the DP cars and maybe one GT class, or maybe it was DP only or something like that. And it was just like kind of the coolest event of the weekend, because you could just sit and chill and relax and watch it, and it was sports cars. So that's the one thing I hope, with this resurgence and OEMs pumping money into it, from not only from a competition perspective but a commercial perspective, is that more people are exposed to it. And again, going on a tangent, look at the crowd we had at Daytona.
Yeah,
it was massive.
Yeah, that was spectacular, wasn't it?
When they said there was 61,000 people there on for the race, I believe there were 61,000 people there for the race. So it's just such a great property. Sports car racing in general, it's just so fun. And if you ever get to go over to Europe and experience their racing over there, I've done Le Mans twice, and did it in a tent one year, and did it in Airbnb the next year. Just the way that event unfolds throughout the week and a half being down there is quite incredible.
I think the only thing that's a barrier to entry with sports car racing right now, and it's unfortunately, it's an inherent part of it, is the fact that the biggest events are a massive time investment. It's not like sitting down to watch a Grand Prix. It's not even like sitting down to watch Daytona 500 or the Indy 500. If you want to watch the Rolex, there is information overload for someone. I don't know really how you fix that. I mean, it is truly baked into sports car racing. What we like about it, And frankly, what I like about it, I think the endurance races are where it's at. That's what I like to see in sports car racing. But from a marketability standpoint, you really don't have a big race that everybody tunes into that is a consumable, TikTok attention span, 2.5 hour race. I mean, as much as I love Long Beach, the draw of Long Beach is the Indy cars. And,
Mhm.
I don't think people, if people are going to say, we're going to tune into a Long Beach Grand Prix, they're probably not watching the IMSA race on Saturday. They're watching the IndyCar race. I'm talking about from a TV audience standpoint. I think the actual walk-up crowd for the IMSA race it rivals the IndyCar race at Long Beach. But I think that would be what I would probably identify as the biggest barrier to entry, is the fact that the races that everybody gets hyped up about is also the race that you have to be the most hardcore and committed to watch.
Right. And how many of us, when I wasn't working in IMSA, or wasn't at the Rolex, had your computer set up next to the bed, or your cell phone, or uh, you know, we were going on a road trip one year and I was streaming it on my phone while my wife was driving. And it's kind of to your point, I've gone through three forms of motorsports: NASCAR, IndyCar, sports cars. And what my wife loved when I went to IndyCar racing was that she's like, "These races are only 2.5 hours long. This is great," with the exception of Indianapolis. And for the casual fan, the investment of 24 hours and trying to pay attention to it is quite difficult. But then again, I mean, the TV numbers don't lie. You see a bunch at the beginning and you see a bunch at the end, and your diehards are somewhere in the middle. So, yeah, that's a great point about the time commitment to participate.
So I guess we should talk a little bit about IMSA as well. A big story that broke, was it? I believe it was this week. It might have been last week, late last week, early this week. It might have been the Friday news dump, now that I think about it. Was that the Rolex 24 winning Meyer Shank Racing prototype had their, and I actually have this up. I need to make sure I get this right because I don't want to get this wrong. The tire pressure data, according to IMSA, I'm on IMSA's website, was manipulated, discovered by Honda Performance Development, reported to IMSA, and a penalty has been levied against the team that they've lost 200 team and driver points from the WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. They've lost all of their Michelin Endurance Cup points. They've lost all the prize money from the race. They've also had to pay a $50,000 fine. Mike Shank, team owner and entrant, has been placed on probation with IMSA through June 30th of this year, and they suspended the team engineer responsible for that. Now, Don, you're involved very closely in IMSA. Do you think this penalty, which, as far as I can tell, 200 points essentially takes you, essentially we're saying Meyer Shank Racing is not going to win the prototype championship this year with a penalty that big. But they didn't take the watches. They didn't take the race win. Is it fair?
Ouch is the first word that came to mind when I read that, and then when you kind of regurgitate it. Think back to 2007 and Michael Waltrip Racing, and
Mm.
what they did to new cars, new entry into the sport, with Toyota in the Cup Series, and they messed with the motor. And then you look at this one, and they messed with the tires. And I think that the unwritten rule and the gentleman's rule is you don't mess with the motor and you don't mess with the tires, right? From a really, everybody pushes technology, everybody pushes the envelope. I get it. It's racing, right? There are some really, really smart people out there. And these cars are so intricate, these new GTP cars. And there's so much data and there's so much whatever. Is it a harsh penalty? Absolutely. But I think it just taught everybody an overall lesson. And if it didn't teach them, it refreshed
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
right? I find it, and I don't know how to say this politically correct. I find it fascinating, to be perfectly honest, that this is something that somebody came up with. right? As bad as the fine was, and as terrible as it was for a rule infraction, you sit back and you're like, holy shit! Like somebody did that or figured it out. And I'm not a computer whiz. I have no idea how to offset any of the data or whatever. But like, if you think about it, it's just like, wow, that's pretty insane. And I'm not even using insane in a bad word. I'm saying it's, it was something they came up with or put together. And I think the timing of this is definitely interesting. And you don't know what goes on behind the scenes. It's none of our business. We'll never know. But they were meticulous in how they investigated. They were meticulous in their wording. They were meticulous in their fines and their points levies and all of that kind of stuff. I would say on the surface, kudos to Honda for manning up, if you will, and going to the series and say, hey, there's something awry here. And was their hand forced? I don't know. We don't know that answer. I don't know that answer. But at least they came forth and said, there's something amiss, there's something wrong here, and then it was handled, with due diligence. So crazy that it's a month and a half later and that this kind of comes out. So I wonder, and this is kind of just goes back to ethics of motorsports. Like, who got the win taken away in NASCAR last year?
Oh God, I feel like it was a truck. Was it?
So
Was there? It wasn't a cup team, was it?
I don't know. Somebody got pulled a win last year.
Yeah.
And if you break a rule, it's bad enough to yank the win. I don't know, man. I mean, to me, is this bad enough to take away a win?
Denny Hamlin at Pocono. It was a cup team. Yeah.
That's right. Oh, they had the tape on the.
That's right. No, now I remember.
Yeah. So we're talking about data and tape. So
yeah, that was the tape thing I thought was real silly. I mean, and they took a win away for that. I mean,
but you know what, man? Like a black and white rule book is a black and white rule book. And you get your grace periods and you get your tolerances and you get your red lights and green lights on the dash when you're going down pit lane. And if that thing turns red, you're going too fast. And if you get yanked, too effing bad. Like,
yep.
The rule is the rule. And that is like, this is where I'm like, I'm someone who tries to follow the rules for the most part. I bend them a little bit, warm up the metal and bend it. But like, if the rule says this and you don't follow the rule and you get penalized, too bad, because this is what it says. The red stop sign says stop. If you go through it and you get pulled over, well, I slowed down. No, it says stop. Yep. So we're getting metaphorical here, but yeah, crazy penalty. I don't think I've ever seen anything severe of that in my career other than that 2007 incident. This crime fit the punishment. I mean, in the eyes of everybody, I'm sure they had to come to some mutual agreement that this is what it was going to be, and that's it. So, on to the next one.
Yeah, and I think, well, that was, to kind of get away from the penalty. I mean, I think there'll still be further discussion about it. Check my coverage this weekend, I guess. But I think the big thing that I took away from the Rolex, even prior to hearing anything about tire pressures, was the speed of the Acura. I know they've kind of gotten the BOP hammer handed to them a little bit recently, but I'm very curious to see how all the cars stack up, even on the IMSA side. For this race, I know there's a lot of talk about BOP, and you probably can't talk about the BOP that you want to talk about, but I'm curious to see what the balance looks like this week. I thought the Daytona race was just, especially on the prototype side, but really the whole way through the field, with a couple of exceptions, absolutely excellent. I thought the product was great at Daytona. I'm excited to see how it translates to Sebring, which is a little bit more of a natural terrain road course. We're actually not quite there yet. It's kind of funny to think about Daytona, kind of a temporary road course in some ways, and even Sebring, kind of shares a lot of commonalities with a place like Cleveland more than it does a place like, for example, Road Atlanta. So I'm curious to see as the season goes on how these cars continue to race and match up with one another. And I think Sebring is going to be a continuation of that. Is there anything else before we kind of shift our discussion to more meta things that we need to touch on with IMSA, WEC, Sebring, just in general sports car racing?
No, I mean the BOP thing is always a challenge, right? And you look at when the stats come out and who gets what, and whether it's weight, whether it's airflow, whether it's fuel, whether it's boost, whether it's you name it, right? There's a math problem that goes into this, and it's just like, well, we took away this, but we gave you this, and we took that away from this area of that car, and it's the ultimate game of Frogger of everybody trying to cross the street at the same time and get to the other side at the same time. I think it's so hard these days to kind of try to manipulate BOP too. Like, I walked out of the garage at Daytona, and another team guy chirped at me. He's like, "Bring your sand back to the beach," and I'm like, "Dude, I put lead decals on the side of the car. That's all I'm responsible for. it's putting stickers on." But it's just like you with the amount of data that you have to turn in and the open book and all that kind of stuff. Like, unless somebody goes out there and flies a hero lap with a big toe 3 times down two straightaways, like it's really, really hard to like beat the system. So, it's much smarter heads than I will figure out how that all works. But I was interested to see in the WC timesheet. Obviously, we raced a Porsche and we had our setback at Daytona. They've given us a little bit back for this weekend, so hopefully that helps. But the Porsches in the World Endurance were top of the chart. And I think like Ashton Martin, who was really quick at Daytona, was really slow at Sebring. So interesting to see how this plays out this weekend. But new cars, new technology, new data, new everything. They're not going to get it right the first time. Did it sting for us going from winning the race in dramatic fashion last year to barely staying on a lead lap, which by the way was a damn miracle. After 24 hours being that far off the pace to still be on the lead lap, like that was kind of cause for celebration. So yeah, and go see our friend Derek at Toronto Motorsports this weekend too. Shameless plug for him. You talk about the best merchandise team out there. Like, man, he does a great job. Plaid everywhere. So
I'm pretty sure I got maple flavored jelly beans over there last year.
Yeah, he had those at Road Atlanta last year. I think is where he brought those down. Man, I think they pulled a filling or two out. My dentist was really happy when I came home.
Ringing endorsement. Okay, this is something, a discussion point that has been hot and heavy. In fact, Mike Joy has been trending on Twitter for over 24 hours at this point. We'll start with something that I know I was disappointed to see it. And when I'm disappointed, I know the people that are higher up the food chain than me were especially disappointed to see it. The first weekend where we had NASCAR, IndyCar, and Formula One all taking place at the same place, same time, same day. And actually the TV schedules lined up so that none of them conflicted with each other, though someone could marathon all 3 races and not miss a lap. That was cool. Shout out to the TV partners that are completely unrelated for making that happen. But what we found out was, to varying degrees, some worse than others, the TV ratings were down across the board. NASCAR took, I believe, the biggest hit. It was something like crazy, like 700,000 people lost. I believe IndyCar was around 300,000 to 400,000 down, and Formula One was around 40,000 people down. Is there any explanation for that? I know for a fact that looking on the IndyCar side and looking at my numbers last year, I went back and compared these. For whatever reason, the hype was not there this year for St. Pete. I got like 29,000 people on my first practice video last year. I think I struggled to get 11 this year. And I know I'm not, the content's not getting any worse. So I don't think it's necessarily on my end, but I'm not really sure why the hype wasn't there this year. But I certainly felt it on the IndyCar side. Can you explain NASCAR and Formula One, or even IndyCar for that matter, why the TV ratings were down?
On the IndyCar side, let's be honest here. They've been going through a little bit of a change on the marketing and promotion side. There's still no CMO in that seat.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
least last year, they had some kind of a campaign leading into the season. Whether you liked it or not, at least it was there, right?
Yeah.
Whether you agree with the narrative or who was in it or what they talked about, it doesn't matter. At least there was promotion of it. Interesting because it was a great start time, right?
Hmm.
12:30 or whatever it was, which, everybody
Entertaining
screamed.
race, start to
Yeah,
finish. There
yeah,
wasn't a boring moment.
no, everybody screams noon, so okay, 12:30, close enough.
No,
I think
everybody is me, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But so I don't I don't know. I mean, we've seen an interesting shift or wave in motorsports in general. You've got some series that are going like this, you've got some that are going like this, you've got some that are just flat. Um, I would have been happy if IndyCar was flat because last year I still remember it was Sunday night. I was sitting with a few folks from the series, and I was just like, "Man, I think you're going to have a good TV rating." And they're like, "Well, if we get a million, we'll be happy." And I said, I said I think 1.37, and it came out at like 1.21 or 1.28 or something like that, and it was a really good number. The F1 stuff shocks the shit out of me because for the amount of hype of that series and the money being pumped into it and the promotion and the drive to survive and the social media and these huge budgets and this that, to go down is like I was blown away. I thought they were gonna have, I don't know, 1.8, 2 million. I mean, they were top five on Netflix the week before. So I think there's a big disconnect between the people that watch the show and the actual product, right?
Yes.
And you know what? If you're watching the show, does it say tune in this Sunday at 9:30 a.m. to watch the opener of F1? Probably not,
I
right?
don't think it does. Yeah, I
Right.
don't think so.
So therefore, if you're a fan of the show, you've now got to go binge watching the show on a Wednesday and be like, oh, there's a race on Sunday. What time? Oh shit, it's noon. The race is half over at that point. So that one is the one that blows me away. And I know there's a ton of money and there's a ton of commercial success that they've had, especially here in North America. But I just was shocked to see that one down. NASCAR. I mean, the numbers don't lie. The bar graph there, line chart doesn't lie. It's peaks and valleys. It pops and fizzles here every year with ratings change and audience and all of that kind of stuff. But like they were still three times what IndyCar and
Yeah.
F1 was. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
who are we to who is anybody to say, oh, NASCAR's down a few 100,000? Great. They were still 3x what anybody else was. NASCAR is and will always be the behemoth motorsports property in the United States. It will never change.
I think there's 2 points to be made there. I agree with you on NASCAR. That is the night. Well, it's a 650-pound gorilla now. I won't say 900 anymore, but it's the big thing with NASCAR to me, and really the big thing with the ratings in general. And I think the reason you're seeing F1 continue to get these huge consumer brands from the US, or at least ones that have a big US presence investing in Formula One. And I'm surprised they don't publish these numbers more often. If our pal Adam Stern is watching, hey, publish these or at least signal boost them a little bit, would be demographics. I think the demographics for Formula One have to skew so young that the advertisers are just going like this. I mean, you could have 3 million boomers watching NASCAR, but if you have a million out of 1.2 million people who are under the age of 50 watching Formula One, they're just going to be sitting there going, all right, here's our future. Here's where motorsports is headed in this country. It's probably more of an investment from those companies than necessarily going, okay, the big numbers here in NASCAR. I don't know. I think that's the big thing I would say with NASCAR, and the thing that NASCAR and IndyCar both really should be and they are concerned about. I mean, Mark Miles made that pretty clear when he addressed the media at St. Pete is the demographics, and the demographics right now skew so old that it's going to be tough sledding here for a little while.
So you're talking quality over quantity, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many commercials are shown during an F1 race?
Zero. Well, there's a Mercedes logo in the top right
Oh,
corner.
okay, great. So who cares? If there's no advertising, who cares? Because the big money is being spent on the events. It's not being spent on like the broadcast or whatever. It's getting that young demographic who, young professionals who watch Drive to Survive, whatever, to go to Miami and to go to Vegas and have a good time in Austin, right? Like those are the three party people events of the year, with the exception of Monaco, which none of us can afford to go to. But so you got to look at about like that. Like, what are they trying to attract? Who are they trying to attract? And how are they trying to do it? And it's all event based. And it's not really TV based because there's no advertising opportunity. Red Bull's out front all the whole time, and the people that are that demographic are already drinking Red Bull vodkas, for at brunch, watching it at the bar. But like, I don't know. I'm just really perplexed by it all. Obviously, it's a massive global property, and there's a lot of hype. But like, the amount that some of these brands spend, especially here in the U.S., it's just like, could you do this a different way? Could you reach these people a different way? And it's great for them, right? I mean, Miami will be packed, Austin will be packed, and Vegas is going to be an absolute blowout. But getting back to the TV, if you look at those as like three Super Bowls, right? I've always said that F1 events are a Super Bowl because it's, very few times for each country to host a race. Obviously, in the US, we've got three. But there's huge, massive events in person. It doesn't translate to TV. If you look at Austin, let's say they had 140,000 people at Austin last year for the race, which is, I think, the number that they touted. I'm like, all right, fair. But like the Indy 500 had 2.5 times that. And 3 times as many people on TV. So where would you put your money? Do you want to go do Austin F1 for the half the size crowd and a third of the TV? Or do you want to do the Indy 500 with 2.5 as many people there and, 3 times the rating on TV? Like, so that's too, but, then again, it goes back to the demographics. The younger people are in Austin, the older people are in Indianapolis. So I don't know, man. There's some very, very smart MBA or Masters of Business Administration and Marketing and Commercial Sales that have those numbers that we're not privy to. But that's the interesting dichotomy for me, and especially on the commercial side of motorsports is it the event and the experience, or is it the mass exposure?
It's all about that bar graph, like you said. I mean, I think you made a great point, and I think I will kind of work off of that point. I mean, if I'm an advertiser and let's say I have a $10 million advertising budget and someone has said, you go spend that in auto racing. Okay. Well, I'm looking at and if I know nothing about the problem is a lot of these people know nothing about the sport. They're not educated on the sport. So when they're looking at all these bar graphs, they look at Formula One and they say, okay, well, the rating was flat. They had 1.3 million people. It's an open wheel racing series. It gets that many people watching on television. We could go put our logo on the mirror of an F1 car for $10 million. We can do all sorts of social media activation about it. We'll get the young people to know about us. Or we could go on IndyCar where they drop 300,000 people. Sure, yeah, we could probably buy half the grid for $10 million. But at the end of the day, we're looking at the demographics and it's like the average age is 65 years old. And, the youth movement or anybody, under the age of 50 who's going to be our consumer for the next 50 years is going to be looking at that number and saying, I don't know about that. Yeah, there's 3 million people, but they're all going to be dead in 20 years. That's the big problem. I think that advertisers or people with the pocketbooks are looking at it. It's not just about raw numbers anymore. It's about growth potential. I think a lot of these people probably, I would guess, come from the stock market, and they probably look at it as coldly as that. There's not, and the other problem is with racing is that there's not as many passionate people who have wealth anymore. You think about like an Elon Musk type. What's he doing? He's buying social media properties. He's not building race cars. And then that's kind of what the Andy Granatellis of the past used to do and helped prop up racing. He makes a fortune in STP, but he was trying to run in the Indy 500 in the 30s. Well, he builds this this huge empire and then starts bringing, cars that are powered by helicopter engines and getting all these huge headlines and all this stuff. And we're just not having that right now. Racing in some ways is becoming a very, very cold industry, very, very quick, passionless, I guess you could say. And that's what I kind of worry about going into the future is it just seems like it's less and less about loving it. And it's more and more and more and more about the bar graphs, which is so depressing.
On that point, though, my dad, conservative guy, retired senior executive from Kodak, came to 2 IMSA races this year. And I distinctly remember we were sitting on top of the WeatherTech Paddock Club at VIR. And he looked at me and he goes, Donald, let me give you the one takeaway that I've seen coming to these 2 races. And I was like, what? He goes, these people actually give a shit about their cars. And like and that just goes back to what I was saying earlier about the relatability of sports car racing and the tangibility of it. And so I think the passion is there, but I think the commercialization, the Drive to Survives, whatever, have brought this Jersey Shore type like atmosphere to it, right? If you looked at Miami, it was fake water and yachts and cabanas and all of it. Great. I mean, they made a spectacle of it. They sold a shitload of tickets and some people had a good time. How many years is that going to translate, right? You look at Nashville. First year of Nashville was great. Not a seat to be had if they were actually put up on time. Huge downtown atmosphere. Great turnout at the track. It was hot. It was whatever. The experience was not the greatest because of some of those variables. Next year, it fell off, right? What are they going to do? Bring it back. So I wonder if Miami year 2, which I've started to see advertising for Miami F1 tickets, which I never saw last year, right? They went on sale, sold out. So I scroll my Instagram and there's, best experience of the weekend, buy now. F1 in Vegas is going to be packed to the gills. Great. How many people are going to walk away saying this is a great experience? I want to spend $6,000 again next year. I don't know. And then how does that translate to, okay, I'm going to go home. I watched Vegas. I'm going to watch insert race, next race here next weekend. So I think that remains to be seen because I think when you have a good event, good in-person event and good attendance, you the next week you start to see a little bit of a growth in the numbers. So remains to be seen.
Well, and to Brian's point, and we'll move on from this. Actually, no, I do have to make one more point about the TV. I almost got off topic, but to Brian's point, and I'll read the super chat in full towards the end. But Brian mentions Formula V. I mean, when you're talking $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to attend one race, if you're passionate about auto racing, there's a lot better ways to spend that money. You can go Formula V racing. You can go to Skip Barber Racing School. You could go to your local go-kart track and either rent or buy an LO206 go-kart and go racing yourself. And there's so many other ways to spend that money. To go to one Formula One race, you might and maybe you want to do it once, but to your point, you probably don't want to do it twice. So yeah, that's a tough thing. The last thing I'll bring up, and I kind of teased Mike Joy or the fact that Mike Joy has been trending over the past couple of days. Uh-oh, have we lost Don Rohr?
No.
Oh no, he's back. He's kind of fading in and out. Hi, Don. Oh, there he is. There he is. Is the commercial debate. And I understand I was one of the problem childs at Daytona. I was beating the drum. I was the one making fun of them. I did a huge lampoon thing in my Daytona 500 video. But I will say this, that the last 2 NASCAR on Fox races I've watched, which were Fontana and Phoenix, I obviously missed Las Vegas because I was in St. Pete. I felt like the commercial interruption was a lot less egregious, a lot less offensive, but other people don't feel that way and have been taking it out on Mike Joy on Twitter. Don, again, you're the business guy. Commercials in racing, is it really more now than we have experienced in the past? And why did Daytona not pass the eye test?
Who did you and I text about this profusely last night. This is probably after I had to sit through watching the Oscars, and I was
Oh yeah,
just
I was wondering why you were in a bad mood. Now I understand.
um, it is a business, and it costs money. And Mike tweeted that they have to pay NASCAR $25 million,
Which is more than the IndyCar NBC deal for the entire
right?
year, by the way.
And
Just
that's
so we're
before
aware of
you
that.
and that's before you pay for talent. That's before you pay for trucks and trailers. That's before you pay for studio. You got to pay for satellites. Like, think of all of the things that bring a broadcast to your television, where you can walk 12 feet to your own bathroom and not fight concession stand lines and shitters that ran out of toilet paper. Like, that all costs money. And how do you make money in television? You do it with advertising. So was Daytona more than usual? I don't know. I watched it at a sports book in Atlantic City. It was great. I went to the bar and got another cocktail, and while there was a commercial break. But that was the most amount of viewers that they'll have, so they can charge the most for advertising, right? So if you can cram in more commercials and make more revenue, because the next few weeks are going to show drop offs and you can't charge as much because the sponsor is not willing to pay the same for 4 million people as they did for 9 million people, great. It's a business. So I have a really, really hard time with the keyboard cowboys who are just like, too many commercials. Oh my God, you missed racing. Like, okay, if in golf they miss a hole in one, they go back to the replay. If something happens in a race and they're at commercial, they show a replay. That's what it's there for. So I'm so sick of the bitching about commercials because it's brought to your television in your home. Here's the for the people that are upset about it, then great. If you live in Atlanta, Georgia, and you wanted to watch Phoenix commercial free, buy a plane ticket, get a hotel, get a rental car, buy your food and beverage and your race ticket. Then they're gonna be like, oh, it costs too much to go to a race. Well, what do you want? Right? Do you want to sit in your air conditioned home and get Domino's delivered to your front door, or do you want to pay that money for a non-commercial experience? So Mike deserved an Oscar last night for being candid and for putting it all out there, and for like, it just it baffles me, man. We're people get upset. If should they offer a commercial free opportunity? Sure, whatever. They tried that. I think it was his point. They tried that with DirecTV Hot Pass, and it fell apart. So um, I don't know. That also costs money, right? Who's paying for the bandwidth? Where's it going to be streamed? How much is it going to cost? Like, all of that kind of stuff. So that's why ESPN, they just flip a switch when it comes to and grab the Sky Sports feed and show it right to the TV. There's no production cost involved with it, right? They do their Sports Center pre-post, whatever it is, but there's no cost. They're not running trucks. They're not running cables. They're not sending camera crews. They're not flying people all over the globe. Like, that's why ESPN paid what they paid for the F1 rights, and they don't have to advertise because who cares? It was like 80 or 90 million bucks. No big deal.
The conclusion and the bombshell that I got out of it, and I mean, you and I have talked about this. I've talked about it with several different people. I mean, I've talked about it on the channel. One of the huge, uh, I don't remember exactly the word. I want to say windfall, but that's not right. I guess one of the things that's going to show us where the wind's blowing, I guess we'll put it this way, in racing, it's going to be when NASCAR signs their next TV deal. The fact that Mike Joy brought up that $25 million number per race for NASCAR Cup Series broadcasts, that is not, I mean, that cannot be a sustainable number. The fact that NASCAR expects that much from their broadcasting partners, and they of course get the double dip because they have two broadcasting partners. I think it's like 500 million each, essentially $1 billion per year from the two broadcasting partners. That I just don't see a scenario where it's that high again. Especially now that you have the face of your broadcast, one of your broadcasting companies publicly saying we struggle to break even with the price that NASCAR charges us to broadcast this race. It sounds like people are going to be tightening their belts in the next couple of years. That's what I interpret from that tweet.
So I'm on your side when it comes to that. but the people that are more in tune with the room are kind of what you were saying about the F1 demographic, right? It's the people that are actually tuning in to watch the race, right? That is a quality viewer, um, for an advertiser, because they're tuning in to watch live sports. You know, it's live. They don't DVR it as much and fast forward through the commercials, yada yada. Um, so you can charge more for advertising as well. You know, you got to remember that motorsports, whether it's NASCAR, IndyCar, F1, IMSA, it builds the brand of the network. So if you're Fox, you could probably make money running infomercials for 4 hours on a Sunday for whatever, hair straighteners, crock pots, you name
My
it.
pillow.
Yeah. But that is going to turn people away from your network as a whole. Like, why do I want to tune into Fox on a Sunday? Because I'm just going to see something sold to me. So I think that's where Mike says it's a loss. Yes, a lot of brands lose money. That's what flagship stores are for. Do you think those stores in Manhattan make any money? No, they're upside down in their books. But it's a flagship store because how many billions of people go through Manhattan every year for tourists, right? So and then go home and it's a glorified advertisement for them. So I will be interested to see how it goes. I will be interested to see if they sell off just the streaming only rights, right? Like, let's say they get a pot of money for the network or the terrestrial TV or whatever they call it these days, and then they get a bucket of money for the streaming rights. And then that's maybe where the people that are upset about commercials can pay X number of dollars a year to watch it commercial free. Then they're going to complain that it's too much to watch it commercial free, and they're going to tune in on their television. So, I mean, it's a no interesting situation, man. So, and I texted you this last night. Like I've been a race fan since the 1991 Daytona 500, 30 some odd years, 32 years. I don't think once ever have I sat there and gone, "There's too many commercials," or complained about a commercial break or whatever. Once in a while, if there's like back to back after like 2 laps, I'm like, okay, whatever. You know, that just means it's time to go to the fridge and get something. So, um, it's a really delicate balance, but it's a business. These broadcasting companies need to offset their bills. If it's 25 million just to start the engine, plus everything else, well, it's got to be paid for, right? This is your YouTube. Like, if do people complain if they're watching one of your YouTube videos and halfway through there's an advertisement? No. Well, maybe, but that's how you get paid.
Rarely.
But that's your revenue stream, right? So you can't, and this is what I'll call you bullshit on it. You can't complain about TV and commercials there when if I'm watching one of your YouTube videos and something pops up in the middle of it. It's the same thing. So, um, I don't know. That's where I sit on the whole commercial thing. It frustrates me, man, because you're getting something brought to your living room.
I think they're the issue that I would have with it is I think they double dip. And I understand, like, because, like, okay, yeah, like, I agree you can run an ad in the middle of a race. Like, I don't, it sucks, especially now that we've been spoiled with commercial free F1 to have uh commercials have such a spotlight shown on them. I think the problem that I have, and the biggest problem I have with the broadcasts nowadays, is that they go to commercial. Okay, fine. You know, they have side by side these days, and they kind of try to load those at the end of the race. That's appreciated. But they'll come back from break, and they'll do like an advertising segment. Like, they'll go to the Wendy's on board, and it's just, I roll my eyes at that. Like, do one of the two. I mean, and I understand, like, I like money, everybody likes money, but, like, either be creative with how you integrate the advertisements into the broadcast, like the Wendy's on board. That's fine if you cut a commercial breakout, in my opinion. And now I understand, again, if they can get a dollar, they're going to try to do it. But my personal pitch would be, you know, any kind of racing, you know, if you can't eliminate ads, find a more creative way to integrate sponsored segments or ads into the coverage without interrupting green flag racing. That would be my suggestion or solution to it.
I get it, one of the smartest people in motorsports, in sports business, is Frank Kelleher. And Frank runs Daytona now, and he was a senior sales exec at ISC for years. I have more respect for what that guy's done in his career and the way that he's gone about business than probably anybody. Top three. I still have a napkin from a dinner I had with him in 2012 in Kansas. And it was 4 quadrants. It was team, media, property, and league. And those are the 4 quadrants to a successful partnership. So you just talked about Wendy's. Well, if they're sponsoring a car, if they're doing something at the track, if they're doing an integrated ad buy, and they're not a league NASCAR official sponsor, but whatever, let's just say they check that box. That's a brilliant sponsorship. So you got to think about it in terms of the business practice of Wendy's, because it's their spend, it's not yours, and they're trying to attract growth and people to go, buy their hamburgers and not cut corners and all that kind of stuff. So, and the flip side is, do you want them to go away? Because if they don't get their impressions and they don't get their return on investment and they don't get their revenue and they spend it elsewhere, hockey, baseball, football, soccer, whatever, and we lose the car on the grid or whatever, then what? Then we're saying, oh man, Noah Gragson lost a sponsor. That sucks,
Yep.
right? Because we were upset about the way that they positioned their commercials. Well, I don't think there were many brands that activated better at the Daytona 500 than Wendy's did, right? Like,
You're right.
Even to the fact that their CMO or CFO or whoever was on Twitter, bagging their competition. So
chirping at McDonald's, that was something.
Yeah.
No, but to me, chirping at McDonald's, when he would chirped at McDonald's and said their livery sucked, I was like, great, I'm going to buy a Biggie bag right now, because that's the kind of for a 30-year-old man, who grew up on the internet, all this stuff. That to me, I'm like, yes, you get it. The Wendy's on board of the race, then it's like, okay, that's not quite they're almost there. They almost get it, kind of how to advertise to the new generation, but they're not quite there yet. I think Wendy's is close, very close. And at least say this, they are a consumer. You can't get any more consumer-based sponsor than a fast food restaurant.
But we were talking about F1 and advertising and sponsorship before. How many consumer brands are on F1 cars?
Not as many as we'd like. There's Duracell. I know Anheuser-Busch is on. I think the Williams too. Williams got a lot.
There's no full livery other than Red Bull. That's a consumer brand, right? So, I think we take TV for granted, right? I think that and it's too easy to complain. 20 years ago when we didn't have Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, I think you just dealt with it. Now you have an outlet too. Maybe that's the other thing. It's you can just pick up your phone and be like, oh man, another commercial. Well, what did you do 20 years ago? Write a letter to the network that says you're showing too many commercials.
People did that. People did that.
Right. But then you got to find a letter, an envelope, a stamp. You got to get your mom to drive you to the post office. Yeah. So, I don't know. It's a no-win situation, but it's a business. It's do you debate over commercials on your favorite sitcom? Because you know what? There's given time. In a 30-minute show, there's 26 minutes of TV, 4 minutes of commercials. So
yep.
I don't know. It's broken down.
But of course, that's scripted television. Auto racing shouldn't have a script. And that's where I'm going to get to a segue of the Don Gets David in Trouble segment. This is usually reserved for Kyle. This is where the co-host of the podcast springs something on me that I'm not expecting. Doesn't necessarily have to be getting me in trouble, but we'll see.
It's not gonna get you in trouble. It's what got you in trouble. Because I've been a follower of yours obviously for a while.
Oh no!
But what is the one? This is you got to think back here, and I could probably name 6. But what is the one thing that after you posted it and you got a reaction, whether it was instantly or feedback from series or drivers or executives, where you went, oh shit, I should not have done that?
Oh man, that's interesting. That is interesting. So You know what's interesting? You say feedback from series. There's almost none. I almost hear nothing. It's always second or third hand. I think there's been one thing from IndyCar that I've heard, and it was not something that was necessarily like any kind of a controversy. Um, but yeah, not a lot of like serious communication I've heard. Definitely a lot of feedback from other people. Um, God, I'm trying to think of like a specific one thing that, and you said right away, right? Too.
No, I mean, so some of it's like you post, and all of a sudden you get this initial reaction and a flood of something
That
that
happens
might
a
be,
lot. That happens a
yeah,
lot.
might be controversial, and you go, "Oh crap, did I just rip a can of worms open here?" Um, and then you sleep on it, and the next day, like you get some feedback where it's like, "Hey, man, you shouldn't have done that." So there's got to be one that stands out because I know what it is. Well, there's two. One we can talk about, one we can't. But there's
I don't know which one of those. I think I know what two you're talking about. I guess it's we're talking about the energy drink thing, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Was that the Daytona one? No.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that we can skip that one. This is a family show.
Oh, okay. Well, then I don't actually know what the other one is that you're thinking of
God,
particular
when
in
you
particular.
snuck into the damn speedway and bought a museum ticket for $10 to film aero screen testing or whatever, whatever it was.
Oh, okay. So no, you're conflating two different things. So I know what you're talking about. The aero screen test. So the the mounds on the museum are open to the public. There was one time where they were not, and I'll talk about that in just a second because I did sneak into the track for that. But the aero screen test, that was a weird one because that was one I didn't realize I pissed anybody off until like a year or two later. I mean, I had no idea. Um, but I guess they were testing the aero screen. I knew it was happening, so I said okay. And I wasn't even living in Indy then. I was like, I'm gonna go to this thing. So I drove across country, went to it, filmed it, put together a video, said, hey, here's the aero screen. Take a look at it. Here it is. Um, yeah, that was one of those things that I had no idea was a problem until much later. I do know that the COVID year, the second COVID year, but the year that we actually got to go to the race, 21. And I will freely admit this. I don't care at this point, statute of limitations and whatnot, because it wasn't like that big of a deal. I don't personally think. I mean, maybe you think of it as differently, but I remember we went to the museum on that day that they were testing, and you could go into the museum, but they had to shuttle you across the street from a gravel lot. They put you on the tour bus or whatever, drove you in, and then said, okay, go in the museum now. So there were a lot of people that were doing that because a lot of people showed up for this test. I mean, they said the fans couldn't show up at close enough to the point where people had already made travel plans to go, sit on the mounds for this test because they hadn't gone to the Indy 500 in the past year. So there were a lot of people in town for this thing, and there were a lot of people, trafficking the museum. So we went in there, we messed around a little bit, my friends and I, and then we walked outside and we're like, hey, it's pretty cool. We can actually see the cars on the track. I didn't get to do that last year. And then we kind of realized that as people were kind of like shuffling off into the tour buses, like the tour buses would fill up because there were that many people. So we just kind of were like, you know what? We're just going to kind of hang around the back, all these people filing in, and then go, oh, shucks, the bus is full. Now we have to sit here and watch a little bit more. And we did that a couple of times. And then some executives got wise to it and asked us to get on the bus, and we did. There was no big issue there, but yeah,
Yeah,
that was how I got to watch a little bit of the testing.
there's a great story, kind of along those lines about the Indy 500 with no fans. There was somebody who watched the entire race from turn 3, and I'm not talking the treehouse, the
Yep,
grandstand.
I might know this person.
I
Person
saw
I
him at a
believe has
friend.
told me this story.
I saw him at a friend's house. We were playing. We were just having a drink after the race because I was lucky to get to go to that. But yeah, I mean the person who snuck in there and the way that they did it and watched the entire race was just one for the ages. So yeah, it's All right. Well, I mean, you do get yourself in trouble once in a while, and I got to look out for you. And sometimes people are like, "Oh, you're friends with that David Land kid," and now I'm on your podcast. And I'm going through the
Now
chat, and
you're in real
nobody,
trouble now. You got the
nobody.
target is just squarely on your back. People are going to be throwing tomatoes and arrows at you at Sebring. You're not ready for it.
Yeah, I have not gotten chastised in the chat yet, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through it. So, thanks for everybody who like tuned in and listened to me ramble about motorsports and the business of racing and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna go on like an Instagram live and get David hammered in Sebring and go
No,
on.
we don't need no PR disasters. I'm keeping my nose clean in Sebring. We're just gonna go have some fun. We're gonna be doing some good coverage and whatnot. I will say the other thing that a lot of people in the chat are saying it. The Penske prototype at night at IMS. Um, I didn't get in trouble for that. In fact, I'm gonna be because I don't think the statute of limitations has quite gone away where I can name names yet. But I will say this. Um, I have a guardian angel at IMS who fended off a person who was running very high up in that particular team that was testing that car. There was a phone call, and thank you to the person in IMS who defended your boy because that was quite an interesting story when I heard that one. And someday I will tell it in full, but today is not the day. Let's
Yeah.
hit some super chats real quick and you can talk about that, Don, if you want to.
No, I'm just looking at chat right now. Some guy named Nutzak that says, "I'm not surprised the business guy says it's just business. I'm also not surprised the guy that gets to go to a bunch of races said if you don't want to watch commercials, go to a race in person." So Nutzak, I would like you to know that when I go to a race, I barely have any opportunity to watch it because I'm working and I have a commercial job and I have sponsors and people to take care of. Um, if I'm lucky, I'll get to catch the highlights at some point. I mean, I think, man, last year's Indy 500, because I actually bought a ticket to sit in the grandstands, was the first race that I had sat and watched for almost the entirety. So, um, anyways, that's the only negative feedback. Cool.
Yeah, my audience is generally pretty cool. And speaking of cool, here's some super chats to read. Taurus sent a couple. He said condensed tape delay broadcast question mark. NHRA does that, but they also have a streaming option if you want to buy it. I don't think that would work for like sports cars, which I believe that was when the super chat was sent. I know that ALMS tried something called docudramas. I don't know if you remember that. Don, I think it was like 2010 or 2011. They actually had like the production studio that produced the Le Mans movie with Steve McQueen, like make the race broadcast into like a documentary, but there was no like way to watch the actual race. It was like I think they were on CBS Sports, if I remember correctly.
I don't. I, this is probably before you were born. Like TNN used to do some Sunday morning shows in between Bill Dance Outdoors and some bass fishing show, where they would show stuff like that. I used to like the IndyCar, race in 30 kind of thing or whatever it was. Like you'd be able to go online and watch the race in 30 minutes or less or something like that.
They still do that, I believe.
I either watch it on TV and enjoy the commercials, or I listen to it on the IndyCar radio network.
Yeah, well, shout out to those guys. They do a great job.
When you're mowing your grass, man, and you're listening to those guys and they start going off, man, those hedges come down real quick.
Yep. Taurus also talks about Tom Brady partnering with a Porsche LMDH, but it's an Acura with deflated tires. Oh, that's terrible. Why'd you make me read that? Yes.
How cool is that, though?
It is, yeah, pretty well. So the Porsche LMDH that Tom Brady is with is the Jota car, which is one of the cars that may end up eventually crossing over and being a convergence car running in IMSA and the World Endurance Championship. Milton says, any advice for new sports car fans like myself? What makes a good sports car race and what makes a bad one? Don, you're the sports car guy.
Honestly, so any race where it's full field multi-class is awesome, because just the optics of it is fantastic. Whether it's each class in itself, if the race is terrible, it doesn't look terrible because they're passing all of these other classes and cars, right? So I would suggest, if you're new to sports cars and you really just want to have a good event, pick a race where it's, all classes or four classes. Um, excuse me. The street courses are a little bit tough, especially on optics. You can't really see the whole thing. Obviously, I'm wearing my Watkins Glen hoodie. Probably that is the most quintessential sports car road race track North America, if not top three globally. And I think it's one of those places where you can just go and sit in a seat and not have your vision impaired and by other people in front of you, and you can drive your car around to different spots on the track and just take it all in, because it's 6 hours too.
Easy to consume for a first timer.
It is, and they do a great job up there, and it's a decent ticket. And you know what? I just renewed my campsites there today. So again, the person that wants me to go to a race, I pay to be there too.
Brian says Formula V turns 60 this year. Over 180 cars registered for the birthday party races at Pit Race in June with FRP. Check it out. Pure passion. Thank you, Brian. I believe I ran, when I got to drive a Formula V for Johan Wasserman. It wasn't a race, obviously, but I got to drive it at Pocono. I believe Brian was out there driving his Formula V. So Formula Vs are cool. I am looking forward. I think I'm going to get an opportunity to drive something this year. I don't know if it's going to be, well, it definitely won't be a race to start out with, but yeah, race car driving is definitely something that's fun to do. And believe it or not, it's a little more affordable than you may think. You just got to do your research.
Yeah, Kyle's not here because he's trying to set fast time at Speedway indoor karting before they close at 10, right?
Is that what he's doing? Well, Kyle, I believe is in Orlando right now. He was on a cruise. That's why he wasn't able to do the podcast last week, and in fact, why he missed St. Pete. But that worked out anyway, because I thought, and shout out to Luke Edwards from the museum. I thought Luke on short notice came in and did a fantastic job. I mean, honestly, on short notice, I think he really even raised in some ways the level of what the content we were producing. I mean, some of the shots that he was able to get were great. So it all worked out. Kyle will, I assume, be back next week. We got one more super chat. I'm going to refresh this real quick and just make sure we got one more from Tara. So Oscar says, love the podcast, David, but why in God's name do we still have two Indy GPs? If you could replace the second race with another track, what would it be? I'd like to see the Glen, Michigan, or Richmond. So, I'm probably going to steal Don's thunder here by explaining why there's two Indy GPs, but it's cheap to do. And NBC pays for the second race because it's part of the Brickyard weekend. So essentially it's a free race for IndyCar to do. And obviously the GP of Indy kind of pays for itself because people are already in town for the 500. Many people make a month out of it anyway. So there's people in town willing to spend money on IndyCar racing. So that's why. Do I agree with it? Hell no. Who would I replace it with? I mean, I've been thinking about this. Just today, I watched the 1991 Michigan 500. And if you have not watched that, very underrated race, very exciting. I mean, Michigan would be number one for me. I think a 2-mile oval. I think even Connor Daly said it on his podcast. We got to try to get back to Michigan at some point. Outside of, I know. Just stop it. Stop being a pessimist. I'm trying to be the optimist here. The other ones I'd say would be Homestead, which would never happen. And I had another track in my head, and Milwaukee. So, and there's a teensy chance of that happening. So,
you know where I'd like to go?
Hit me with it.
Utah. What they used to call Miller Motorsports.
Miller, yeah.
Yeah, Utah Motorsports Park. If you look at the population density, this is where I'm the commercial guy. It's about the same as Birmingham. They get a decent crowd there. Granted, you have Atlanta to pull from, but I did an Excel sheet one time about how many people are within 2 hours of that track. I think it'd be fantastic, and it's flat. And so you could, wherever you're sitting, if you're in a raised grandstand or a suite or, on top of your motorhome, you could see the whole thing, kind of like New Orleans or Cleveland was or whatever. But I don't know. I think it's one of those territories that's not upper Midwest like Portland is, or, Southern California. There's a little bit of a gap there. And I think that there's probably enough of a fan base there that could support it. But to your point, somebody's got to pay for it, right? Like I love Watkins Glen. They're going to spread my ashes there, but like uh, it has to be economical. Like this is not a charity for those people that want to see a race somewhere, right? Like the books have to balance. So, the amount of money that it costs to put on some of these events is not cheap, right? Like everything from track rental to insurance. Like these people take out massive insurance policies. If something was to happen at the track because of an on-track incident and somebody gets hurt or killed or whatever, that has to be paid for. You know what I mean? Like these are all the things where people are like, oh, I'd love to see a race here or there. Great, show up, right? And that's Robin Miller used to say that all the time. He'd go on Wind Tunnel and be like, you want to see this race come back? Then go buy tickets, right? Everybody said, bring back Rockingham. Great, they did. One and done, kind of there, two and done, kind of thing. So, look at North Wilkesboro. Yes, they got some state grant money, and they're going to fix that. They're, from what I've seen, fix that place up pretty well. They're going to have 30,000 tickets. Don't build any more seats. Leave it. Don't touch it, right?
Yep.
Like,
no, you're right.
Sell it out and create demand, because that's what made motorsports, especially in the heyday, was fantastic. Like people, there was a demand for it. The other one, and this is just, can we just keep talking for a minute? Because there's a few things.
No, go for it. Go for it.
So the other one that keeps popping up, and Demise 90, I wish they had got my Chicago street race with NASCAR on my channel. So
that'll be lucky if that gets to the first race from what's being said right now.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the politics away from it for a second. It's a street race. We run Detroit, we run St. Pete, we run Long Beach, we run Toronto. Go to YouTube and watch the Pinty's race from Toronto. NASCAR already runs a NASCAR street race every year in Toronto, and it's awesome. It's like Martinsville meets the Glen, because you know what? They can beat and bang, and if they get shoved into the barricade, they throw it in reverse and keep digging. And it's a fantastic show. So yes, there's a lot of politics and BS and stuff surrounding the Chicago race. I get it, right? People don't want their city shut down for that amount of time.
That was Freudian.
It was Freudian. It's like Belle Isle, right? That's another reason that
I actually liked Belle Isle. I left Belle Isle. I was like, oh, I'm kind of sad that's going away. I went there once for the last one, and I was like, you know what? This is too bad.
No, it was comfortable.
I just couldn't see anything. The lake breeze was great, but outside of that, you can't see a damn thing. They should have built some GA grandstands, but that's,
Yeah. So I think that the Chicago thing, if it goes off, is going to be great, because you like, again, you're not going to have that much carnage. Yes, they're going to crash going into the turn, but somebody's going to throw it in reverse and keep digging. Like it's not going to be like these massive, follow the pace car cleanups. Now, if it rains, could be a different story. But I'm interested to see how Chicago goes.
The problem with street courses is that they just don't have longevity. I mean, you mentioned the three that actually have longevity: St. Pete, Long Beach, Detroit. And each of those began Long Beach in the 70s. St. Pete was street racing in the 80s. Obviously, it was a different track, but Trans Am was running there from, I think, around 1984, 1985. Detroit had a Formula One race in the early 80s, and then transitioned to kart in the downtown streets, moved that race to Belle Isle, then became an IRL race, had some times off and on, but like that race has its roots in the 80s. There really isn't a street course that has lasted in Toronto mid 80s. There hasn't really been a street course that has lasted more than 3, 4, 5 years that has been, founded in the last 30 years, which is hard to believe considering how many street course attempts there have been. But just generally speaking, they don't last.
And it's how they get off the ground, right? Like if they hit the
Mhm.
ground running, and those iconic street races have lasted over time because they were successful early on, and went from there. Like you there's and cities change too. Like if all of a sudden exhibition place in Toronto changes and they build across the street in the paddock area, like how is that going to change it? There's discussion about Nashville and they're going to move the stadium where the pit lane and paddock is. Okay, how is that going to affect Nashville? There was chatter about Long Beach and potential Anaheim Angels baseball stadium and knocking down the convention hall. Like, you know, some of those things are
Don't you put that
well.
evil on me, Ricky Bobby.
No, I don't think that they will. If we were going to do another street race, the one that I was looking on Google Earth about this not too long ago, in and around City Field in Queens, Manhattan,
Oh, wow.
because you've got a lot of roads, you've got a lot of areas that you could map out the track, but what you have is a lot of mass transportation. The Long Island Railroad comes this way, and the New York City subway comes this way, and they meet at one stop, right? So if you can put 50,000 people in there for a baseball game, you can put 50,000 people in there for a race. Um, and it's accessible from New Jersey as well, Connecticut, all those other points, east, west, north, south. So I'd love to see, and it's New York, right? You'd have Manhattan in the background. It's not the city. There's never going to be a race in Manhattan. Like I don't care how much money. You think the Chicago thing is an uproar? Take it from somebody who lived in New York and used to go watch the NASCAR Cup cars on banquet week go through the streets. The the shitstorm when they would have to shut the streets down for 30 minutes so they could do one lap around the city with a police escort was out of control. They were just up in arms. So yeah, they ain't shutting that down for a period of time, but it'd be fun.
We got two super chats to go. I'll say Brian's first because it's not really anything that will. Well, interesting. Still finishing third in Vintage V. Hopefully, seat for you at Gingerman late April 2024. I would not say no to that. Hit me up. I would definitely get in better shape. That's for sure. Tara says one last thing. Who do I pay in IndyCar race control or the drivers to get them to not bunch the field up at the start of Texas with 27 to 28 cars? Yes. I've said this a few times. I believe it's been pointed out on Twitter. I actually saw a tweet from about 3 years ago that I made about Pocono come back up. Someone brought it up. Was that I made the point that the the Pocono starts became more dangerous when they moved away from the three wide Indy style start where the rows are spaced out. I think that's the same with Texas. I don't think you could or would want to start them three wide there. But I know there was a lot made about Brian Barnhart's time in race control, and a lot of it was justified. But I think one of the things he did very well was made sure the oval starts were not kind of disasters like we saw in 21 at Texas. I think both starts had big crashes right off the bat. And I think, maintaining even space with the rows, I think is going to be a big talking point with Texas on the start because it will be volatile with 27 cars going into the first turn with a groove of PJ1 potentially going to grab a couple of them. And I would like to see, I think everybody, anytime you go to a big oval like that, wants to see the safest race possible. I mean, oval racing is inherently dangerous. It's inherently exciting. That's why, that's part of the danger factor is that excitement that comes with it. But yeah, I mean, it is dangerous. So we want to, racing, we take enough risks if we can try to, get the drivers to space out a little bit on that start. I think that would be great. I don't have any complaints there. Don, do you have any comment on the start procedure, especially on ovals?
Did you go back and watch the start of St. Pete, the overhead? I was sitting there like my seat was was row one on the front straightaway, so it's kind of tough to see. But there was a jumbotron, and you looked out, and they were single file through the final turns as they were taking the green flag. So that's probably why somebody came in there a little bit late because they
Yeah.
were I would like to see St. Pete started a little farther or a little closer to turn one, if you will. I
Mhm.
would also like to see Portland started a little bit closer to turn one and take out that stupid chicane on turn one. I mean,
It's a tradition, the Portland pileup every year.
it's
Come on.
just stupid. Like again, I worked with Hinch 2 years in a row. We were taking out turn one, lap one, and I've got a suite full of 50 guests. Like it doesn't work. Like
That was a hell of an
just
onboard though when he had Marco land in his lap. That
yeah,
was
loved it. It was great. Loved it. It's wonderful. Great sponsor time. You know, it's I would definitely on the ovals. eh, I don't know, man. I think they
Well,
just
you
get
want
they
them
did.
two by two, but I'm just saying you want spacing between the rows. I agree with you. I think the problem with
So
this
you're hang on a second. You're gonna tell a race car driver leave space, more space with the guy in front of you.
they don't do it in Indianapolis because Dixon brings him down too slow. But when it's not Dixon and not Elliott, because Dixon brings him down too slow and Elio like goes in turn three when he's on the pole. But if it's not Dixon or not Elio on the pole at Indiana, I thought I'll give your boy credit here. One of the best looking starts in the last couple of years was Hinchcliffe on the pole in 16. I thought the rows were even. The start was nice and fair. I thought, and looked good.
It
That's what I want.
it's crazy like at Indy, and I'm used to coming from NASCAR into IndyCar. You're used to that line right where, and then the flag starts it. Where like the Indy 500, I mean they got to be in third gear by the time they're in the middle of the short shoot there. Like pace car drivers hurrying to get the hell out of the way, kind of thing. Um,
Pace cars have been a problem at the Indy 500. That's for sure. They have cost someone the race before. So yeah,
K Ben says Texas should not be on the schedule. Big waste of a race date. You wouldn't have said that if what was the year that Hinch and Rahal?
16.
Yeah,
I thought last
before.
year's race was fine. I mean, is it two grooves? No, but some people were making that second groove work. Jimmy was making it work. Kirkwood, I think, was one of them making it work. And didn't Newgarden pass McLaughlin around the outside on the last lap? I mean, yeah, is it
I
Old Texas? No, but was last year's race bad? I don't think so.
No, I mean 3 and 4 is old Texas. 1 and 2 is new Texas, and that's where it's all screwed up. Especially with the way that the track circumference comes around onto the back straightaway. Like you can't run high there because it's like a 90-degree turn, and that's when cars snap and spin around.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I still live and die by the sword that the 2015 Fontana race is the greatest motor race in the history of the world. So
You'll never see it again.
sad
Uh,
face.
yeah.
Well, I gotta go. It's
Yeah,
like
I was
10
about to say
o'clock.
no. We're wrapping up. We're wrapping up. We went a little longer than we wanted to, but of course we had 2 weeks of content. Don, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like on it. Gonna let this guy go. He's got a plane way too early in the morning. I've got a plane in the afternoon because I thought about, well, I probably don't have as many responsibilities as Don does, but yeah, we'll be in Sebring. Make sure to tune in for the coverage of that. I'm excited to get run over and trampled by the Tafulsi, and we'll see you then. Thank you, guys.